In this video, we will discuss how to create a best interest determination, or BID. The objectives of the session are to discuss what is a BID, when to create a BID form, how to create a BID form, and how to share a BID for review and for BID panels or bid panels. A best interest determination is the formal procedure for assessing the child's best interest, taking his or her best interest as a primary consideration in decisions, evaluating the possible impact of such decisions, and guaranteeing the implementation of decisions in his or her best interest. While these can be done for any child at risk, they are most often completed for children who do not have parents in their lives to help them make the decisions, such as unaccompanied or separated children. As part of your best interest assessment, or BIA, you will identify if there is the need for a best interest determination for the specific child you are working with, and when this is necessary, you will then create a BID. So when exactly should you create a BID? A BID should be created for any child that meets one of the BID triggers outlined in the BIP guidelines in Chapter 4. These can include durable solutions and complementary pathways for unaccompanied and separated children, temporary case arrangements, family reunification, separation from caregiver, and any other unresolved custody for children in exceptional circumstances, and any other situation where a child is at risk in exceptional circumstances that will be determined on a case-by-case or context-based situation. Guidance on when to complete a BID can be found in the BIP guidelines in Chapter 4, and this should be outlined in your case management SOPs for child protection and also designated in your child protection module SOPs for Progress V4. Once it has been determined that you will need to move forward with the BID process, then you should create a BID record in Progress V4. This is when you need to schedule a BID process for the child, and you will need to begin scheduling interviews for that process. We will now cover how to create a BID form in Progress V4. When you have determined that a BID is necessary and you are beginning the process of scheduling the interviews for the BID, you will need to create a BID form. To do so, you will go to the Child Protection module. You will search within Child Protection cases for the case of the child that you are looking for. Once you have identified the case, you will enter into the Child Protection case form. Before creating the BID, it is important that you review the form to make sure that you are up to date on the current status of the case. Most importantly, that you're up to date on parent/customary caregiver information, existing current care arrangements and specific needs, and up-to-date BIAs. As this child has 2 BIAs, I will click and do a quick review. You will notice on the BIA that under recommended actions there is the question BID referral necessary. It's also important to review the BIAs for the case to see if this was indicated as yes or no. Now that I have reviewed the BIA, I will go back to the Child Protection case and I will scroll down to the BIA BID section. To create a BID, I will go up to Add on the ribbon and I will select BID. Once I do that, a pop-up box will appear and it will request the main purpose of the BID as well as the opening date. The 6 options for the main purpose of the BID are durable solutions, complementary pathways for unaccompanied separated children, family reunification, temporary care arrangements, other exceptional situations, separation from caregiver, and unresolved custody. These are the main purposes that are outlined in the BIP guidance, and they should also be adapted and contextualized for your operation and included in both your case management SOPs for child protection as well as your child protection module SOPs for Progress V4. For this example, I will select temporary care arrangement, and then I will select the date upon which this began. And a new BID will appear. At the top of the BID, you will notice a workflow which indicates the status of the BID. We will discuss this in a bit. When you open your new BID, you will notice that it is automatically saved as there is a unique identifier at the top. Next, there is a workflow. This workflow will be manually changed by the person responsible for updating the BID. This has 6 steps involved. The first being pending interview, the next pending recommendation, the next pending review, then pending panel decision, next BID completed, and then finally the BID closed. This workflow status will be updated to indicate where the process stands. Guidance for this should be outlined in your child protection module SOPs for V4. The first section of the BID is the overview. Similar to most other forms, this is where you'll have the details, the overview of the purpose of the BID, and then quick views of other forms that are relevant, such as the child protection case and the individual info. For the BID details, the BID number, status, BID status date, opening date, all of these will be automatically populated based upon that initial pop-up window that you created. The first data point or field that we would fill out would be the opening type. So whether or not this was a referral, a group identification, or other. You can then indicate the type of referral, whether it was an internal referral, an external referral, I'll say internal, and then the source of the referral, I can look that up. So this came from assistance. So this came from registration. So this is not a reopened BID, but if I was to have closed a BID, I have the ability to indicate here that this was reopened. All of these, the closing date, the closing reason, will be left until the end, and the process status change will all be left. The overview of the BID includes this, which is the main purpose of the BID, and then we can describe in more detail the purpose of the BID, so temporary care arrangement. Further below in the first section, there's also the tracing details. So if there's information about tracing for family, you can indicate here the date upon which that started, what the status is, whether it's ongoing, whether it has been completed positive or completed negative, and any other comments you might have about the tracing. The next section is care arrangements and specific needs. As on the other forms, you will notice this is just a view to allow you to see what the current care arrangements are or past care arrangements and any specific needs identified. Additionally, you will have quick views here for any existing BIAs, any linked BIDs from family members or other cases that are linked to this child, any incidents, or any other linked child protection cases. All of this is in reference so that you have the information necessary to move forward with the BID process. Next, we have the consent section. This is similar to all other consent sections we've seen across the different forms. You will first indicate the counseling date, the date you explain the consent to the child or the individual with the child. You would then indicate whether or not the person of concern agrees to share this information. As this is a BID form, there's a high likelihood that the individual might not have a parent or a guardian with them to support the consent process. If this is the case, then the consent provider would be indicated as other relative, and under other, indicate your name and in parentheses, caseworker. You would then indicate whether or not the child gave their agreement or their assent. If there is someone else who can consent on behalf of the child, then you would indicate that as appropriate. Or if the child is of the appropriate age or maturity to make these decisions, you can also indicate child. As with other consent sections we've covered in other videos, if the child or if the person of concern agrees to share any information, this would be indicated as yes. And then exceptions to this would be indicated below. So if the exception is to the child protection partner, they do not want it shared with them but with everybody else, then this would be the exception, and information can be shared with other organizations or partners or relevant actors as necessary. Details around the restrictions to share information should be outlined here, if only specific pieces of information can be shared. The next section begins the information very specific to the BID process, and that is going to be the BID interviews and documentation. So a key aspect to the BID process is the scheduling of interviews for relevant stakeholders in this decision-making process for the child. To add a BID interview, you will click on the plus here. An interview form should be included for each of the interviews conducted to complete the BID. When I click on that, a new BID interview will appear. I should create this BID interview form prior to the interview being conducted when I am scheduling the interviews. To complete the BID interview form, I will need to indicate who is being interviewed. If the interviewee is someone who is registered in V4, I would search for them, look them up, and the interviewee registered. If they are not, I would then name an interviewee other. And then I would indicate the relationship to the child. So for this would be their teacher. I would indicate any other persons present. And then I would indicate who is going to be the person responsible for conducting this interview. And then the interview date that this is scheduled. So this will be scheduled for the 19th. And if there's any other information about this interview that needs to be clarified, I will then indicate the organization that the interviewer works for. The language of the interview, if there was an interpreter, who that person was, and the interview location. Once I have completed the general information about the BID interview, I will then include the BID interview notes. So this is where I will document all of the questions and the responses provided by the interviewee. This is a formatted text box, so you have the ability to bold, italicize, indent, bullet point information. Once the notes from the interview have been entered, you will then go ahead and save, and I would save and close. And now I can see under the interview, and I have my first interview. The recommended procedures is to, once the BID interviews that are necessary are identified, you should go ahead and create a BID interview entry for each of those interviews. This will allow you to see the date that the interview is scheduled for and allow you to track the progress of these interviews. In addition to the interviews, there is the document section. If you needed to add a document, you are able to click on the plus here, and it will allow you to indicate which document you are including, the type, the subtype, if that's relevant, the document status, the name of the document, the description, the specific number, the date of issue, the place of issue, issued authority, date of expiry, and whether or not this document is official. Once I have completed my document information, I would then click on Save. The next section is Section 2, Options and Recommendations. Here's where you are going to document the options and the recommendations identified on behalf of the child. The part 1 is the brief summary information on the case. So you would summarize the case. This can be taken from parts of the BIA. This can be taken from the case note, the child protection case form as well, and supplemented. Part 2 is where you will document the history prior to the flight or the separation. Part 3 is where you will document and indicate the current situation of the child. And part 4 is the available options and analysis. So the individual completing the BID will outline what are available options that have been identified with the child and do an analysis on the feasibility and the impact of these options upon the child. And then finally, there will be a final recommendation based upon all of the current situation, the interviews, and the available options analysis. A recommendation will be made here. Once that recommendation is created, it's important to indicate who created that recommendation and what that final recommendation is. Once the main recommendation, BID recommendation, is identified, it is now necessary for the BID to be reviewed by a designated reviewer. This should be outlined in your operational child protection case management SOPs or interagency SOPs. The process to share the BID for review will differ depending upon the access to the file that the reviewer has. If the reviewer is the supervisor to the individual who has completed the BID, then they will automatically be able to have access to this BID file, and all the owner will need to do is to email a link to their supervisor asking for them to review this file. To do so, I would go ahead and I would go up to the ribbon and click on email a link. And an email will automatically pop up. I would then indicate who this email would be sent to and indicate, please, in the text, please review. It is important not to include too much information in the text of the email. The text of the email is not secure, whereas the link that is included in this email is. Thus, anyone who this email is forwarded to would be able to see the text in the email, but only those who have specific access to the case would be able to see the case file if this link was clicked on. So if I do not have access to the child protection module, or I do not have access to this specific case, even if I receive this email with this link, I cannot use it. So all of the information necessary for this child protection case is included in this case file, so it is not necessary to include this in the text of the email. The only things to be indicated in the email are the action that needs to be taken, such as please review, and perhaps a deadline by Tuesday. I would then include the reviewer who this is to be sent to, and I would push send. If the reviewer does not have access to this case file because they are not my supervisor or they do not have privileges for this specific case, I would then need to share this case with that individual so that they would be able to go ahead and to review the case. To do so, I would need to go back to the case and I would then go to share in the ribbon. There is a video on how to share and to transfer a case that will explain the entire procedure. But for someone who does not have access to this case to review the BID, you would need to share the case with them and give them read and write privileges so that they can then include and modify the review note, include their information about whether or not they accept the recommendation, do not accept the recommendation, or require additional review. They can then indicate who they are and who it was that did the review, and then the date that the review was completed. Again, this review should be done by the designated reviewer for BIDs in your operation, and this should be outlined in your interagency or internal child protection case management SOPs. Once the review is completed, you will then continue down to the section 3, which is the panel decision. So based upon the recommendation that's decided, you will then conduct a panel meeting where a panel decision would be made based upon these findings. In preparation for the panel decision, it is highly likely that the individuals that are participating in the panel might not have access to V4. To prepare the materials necessary for the panel, you can run a report of the prepared BID to print out a copy of the BID for each of the members of the panel. These digital or paper copies of the BID information are extremely sensitive and include extremely sensitive information for this child. Thus, they should only be accessible on a need-to-know basis and should be protected to the utmost with data protection procedures, including password protection. To create the report, you would go up to the ribbon and click on Run Report. And you will see that there are two different records that are possible. New BID or a new BID in French. So I'm going to select the new BID. And now you'll notice that a report is being generated. This is then including all of the information that I have created above in terms of the purpose of the BID, the separation status of the child. This is taking their basic information. It outlines the people that were interviewed on the dates of the interviews, who did the interviewing, any documentation, the options and the recommendations from section 2 that you have completed, the best interest determination, the recommendation, who did the assessment, who did the review of this, and then there's section 3, which we have not completed yet, but this is then the panel decision. So if I was to run this report after the panel decision has been done, it will give me the final panel decisions. If I was to do this prior to convening the panel, then this last section would be completed during the session and then would be input into V4 after the session. If I would like to print this, I can print it from this ribbon. If I needed to save a copy, I can save a copy in PDF, Word, Excel. Remember, it is extremely important to password protect these documents. Now back to my BID. Under section 3, it will be the panel decision. So you can indicate what the final panel decision is. So recommendation approved, decision deferred, recommendation not approved, case to be closed, reopen the case. Once that's identified, you'll indicate what date upon which the panel made this decision. And then you can outline the full reasons for this decision. You will then note here the members of the panel and then indicate whether or not you obtained the signatures from those panel members. If you are printing out reports for the panel members, you can have all of the panel members sign one paper copy and then store that and indicate here that yes, you received the signatures from all panel members. Now finally, you will then document here the panel recommended actions. And then at the bottom of this form, you will note there are other information for documentation. So based upon these recommended actions, you will have the ability to include or add a new intervention or a new referral to fulfill these recommended actions. Please see the video on creating an intervention or creating a referral to provide more information about how to do this. Now that is the end of the BID. Now we have walked through the sections of the BID quite quickly, but this would take place over a period of time. And it is important that as we progress through this process, we update the status of this BID. So when I create my BID initially, and I have scheduled my interviews, I will have them listed here. Once I have completed my interviews, I will then need to update my workflow. To do so, I will go to Change Status in the ribbon, and I will click on Pending Recommendation. I will select the date upon which this changed, and I will indicate So if I save and close, and I now look at my child protection case, if I go down, I will see my BID and active, and I will see the status is pending recommendation. Now, if I have to update my BID, I can come to this child protection case. I can click on my BID here, reopen it, and then add in the necessary information. So if I was to include my recommendations, I'm going to also, before I save, I've now created my final recommendations. I will now go and I will change my status in the ribbon as well. And it is now pending review. So I have completed my recommendations, and now I'm waiting upon the reviewer to check. And then I will indicate here the main BID recommendation. Push OK. Now let's say that I am that reviewer and I come to the BIDs. I search for the BID that I am looking for. I then click on this BID number. I then review. Read the recommendations. And I find that this is all okay by me. I would then come here, recommendation accepted, I reviewed it. I would then save my changes, so I've reviewed. You'll notice once I save, my changes are date and time stamped. And then I will go ahead and I will change the status of this. So it's no longer pending review. Now it's pending the panel decision. And so as the reviewer, I would be the one who would change that. I We would keep the main recommendation, my decision. These are automatically populated. And then I will click on OK. Once I do that, and this is saved, so now it is updated to pending panel decision. This is very important that we update the workflow as we move forward. Thus, we can track the status of our BIDs for our work. The next step is once the panel decision has actually occurred, you would then change your status again. And that would be to the BID being completed, and then giving the date that happened, the status, the final recommendation, the panel decision, and the date. Now the question about when to close the BID would be outlined in your child protection SOPs for the child protection module, and as well as in your case management SOPs. But basically, when you've completed a BID, you can leave it as completed in your file, and then when you are moving to close out a child protection case, you would change that to closed prior to closing the case. The procedures for closing a case are outlined in the video on how to close a case. The other reasons why you would modify or change the process status for a BID to closed is if the process was to stop for another reason, such as disappearance, death, any other reason that is outlined in your child protection case management SOPs as to what reasons to halt or to stop a child protection BID from occurring. But other than those reasons, you would just indicate that the BID has been completed and leave it like that up until the closure of the child protection case, at which time it would be modified to change to BID closed. And that is how you create and fill out the BID form.